The air in the warehouse hung thick and still, a stagnant breath carrying the metallic tang of old machinery and something else. Something acrid and unwelcome. I pulled the collar of my jacket tighter, the cheap wool doing little against the persistent chill that seeped from the concrete floor. This was my domain, or at least, it had been for the better part of 20 years. Abandoned factories, forgotten docks, the skeletal remains of industry, they all whispered secrets to me. Usually, the secrets of the dead. My boots crunched on a fine layer of grit as I stepped further into the cavernous space. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, painting a stark circle on the scene before me. Uniformed officers, their movements precise and practiced, already had the perimeter secured. A low murmur of hushed voices bounced off the corrugated metal walls. I recognized the familiar cadence of their work, the quiet efficiency that always settled over a scene once the initial chaos subsided. "James," a gruff voice called out. It was the senior detective, his silhouette sharp against the weak emergency lighting that had been switched on. He was a man of few words and fewer smiles, but I respected his steady hand. I nodded, my gaze sweeping the area. My flashlight beam landed on the chalk outline, stark against the grimy concrete. A body had been here. Now, only the absence remained, a phantom imprint of violence. The preliminary report had been brief, almost dismissive. Blunt force trauma, robbery gone wrong, a quick, dirty end in a forgotten corner of the city. The kind of case that usually ended up filed and forgotten within weeks. "Anything?" I asked, my voice a low rumble. I preferred to see for myself. Reports were one thing, the tangible evidence, the silent witnesses were another. The senior detective gestured with his chin. "Over there, by the loading bay." I moved, my flashlight beam tracking the ground, scuff marks. I knelt, my gloved fingers hovering inches above the stain. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My eyes scanned the periphery. "Anything valuable taken?" I asked, my gaze fixed on a loose piece of metal jutting from a rusted support beam. "Report says wallet was gone, phone too. Standard MO for a street crime." The senior detective shrugged. "Probably just some kid looking for quick cash." I grunted, not entirely convinced. Street crime rarely happened in a place like this, deep within an industrial zone, miles from any residential areas. It felt deliberate, too quiet, too clean. I stood, my flashlight beam sweeping upwards. Cobwebs thick as cotton candy draped from the high rafters. The air, even here, carried that same stale, metallic scent, overlaid with the faint, sickly sweet odor of decay. My beam landed on something glinting near a high window, almost lost in the grime. I angled my light, focusing, a small piece of plastic. I walked over, my steps deliberate, not wanting to disturb anything. It was a shard no bigger than my thumbnail, lodged between two grimy panes of glass. I carefully pried it loose with a pair of tweezers from my kit. Back in the light, I turned it over. It was a piece of a photograph. Faded, almost entirely bleached by time and neglect, but I could make out a sliver of a face. A woman's smile. "Anything?" the senior detective asked, his voice closer now. I held up the shard. "Maybe, depends on what it was part of." I tucked it into a sterile evidence bag. It was a long shot, a tiny fragment in a vast, empty space, but sometimes the smallest pieces told the biggest stories. I continued my sweep, my flashlight beam a methodical probe. I examined the floor, the walls, the discarded debris, the usual detritus of a forgotten place. Then my light caught something unusual near the center of the main floor, a small metallic glint. I moved towards it. It was a cufflink, ornate with a tiny, almost microscopic emblem etched into its surface. It looked expensive, not the kind of thing I'd expect to find on someone looking for quick cash. I bagged it. This was starting to feel less like a robbery gone wrong and more like a carefully orchestrated event. The initial report, the straightforward narrative, felt like a thin veil. My gut, a reliable compass after all these years, was pulling me in another direction entirely. The senior detective was watching me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He knew I was seeing more than he was. He always did. "I think there's more to this, James." he asked, his voice softer now. I didn't answer directly. I was already thinking about the lab, about the careful, painstaking work that would follow, about the stories these silent objects would tell if I listened hard enough. The shard of photograph, the expensive cufflink. They were threads, thin and fragile, but threads nonetheless. It would lead me to the heart of something far more intricate, far more dangerous. The initial report was a lie. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the old restlessness stirring. The game was on. The air in the warehouse hung thick and still, smelling of stale oil and something faintly metallic like old pennies. My boots crunched on grit as I moved deeper into the cavernous space, the beam of my flashlight cutting a shaky path through the gloom. The victim, a man in a cheap suit, lay sprawled near a stack of dusty crates. The scene screamed robbery gone wrong, but my gut, a perpetually nagging companion, whispered otherwise. It was two-staged, too. Neat. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, just a single, precise wound. I knelt beside the body, the latex of my gloves a second skin. The victim's eyes were wide, fixed on some unseen point beyond the corrugated iron roof. I noted the worn leather of his briefcase, its clasp snapped open, but nothing appeared to be missing at first glance. A few stray papers lay scattered around, mostly invoices and shipping manifests, standard stuff for this forgotten corner of the city. A uniformed officer, young and eager, hovered nearby. "Anything, sir?" he asked, his voice a little too loud in the oppressive silence. I didn't look up. "Just the usual mess, officer, bag and tag everything. I want that briefcase dusted, every inch." I'd learned long ago that the devil and sometimes the truth resided in the minutiae. A colleague, a sharp-eyed woman with perpetually ink-stained fingers, was meticulously cataloging the contents of the victim's briefcase. "Anything interesting?" I asked, leaning against a metal counter nursing a lukewarm coffee. She held up a small, nondescript USB drive. It was tucked inside a false bottom of the briefcase, almost missed it. My interest piqued. A false bottom, that definitely wasn't standard operating procedure for a petty thief. I took the drive, the plastic cool against my palm. "Anything else?" "Just the usual corporate flotsam. Nothing that screams motive for a violent end." She gestured to a stack of documents. "Looks like he was middle management at some tech firm. Omnicorp." Omnicorp. The name pinged a faint recognition. Big player, cutting-edge research, lots of rumors about aggressive business practices. I turned the USB drive over in my fingers. This felt more like it. Later, in my dimly lit office, with the city lights painting abstract patterns on my window, I plugged the drive into my secure terminal. The drive was encrypted, of course. A simple password protected it, a string of numbers that meant nothing to me initially. But then, a flicker of memory. I'd seen that sequence before, scribbled on a crumpled napkin in the victim's jacket pocket, dismissed as a grocery list. I'd almost thrown it away. My own oversight, a minor detail I'd almost missed. The files unlocked, a digital Pandora's box. It wasn't just corporate reports. There were encrypted communications, financial transfers, and something far more disturbing, blueprints. Not for consumer gadgets, but for something military grade. Advanced surveillance technology, the kind that could cripple national security if it fell into the wrong hands. The robbery narrative was dissolving, replaced by a far more sinister picture. This wasn't about a few stolen electronics. This was about power, about secrets, about something worth killing for. And the victim, this anonymous middle manager, had been at the center of it all. I scrolled through the files, my eyes scanning lines of code and cryptic messages. The sheer volume of information was staggering. There were references to offshore accounts, shell corporations, and coded names that suggested a clandestine operation. One document, a project proposal, caught my eye. It spoke of data acquisition on an unprecedented scale, of identifying and neutralizing threats before they even materialized. It sounded less like security and more like preemptive assassination. A knot tightened in my stomach. This was far beyond my usual caseload of domestic disputes and street brawls. This was a different league, a dangerous game played by people with immense resources and no scruples. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my weary face. Clever, too clever. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The location of the body, the seemingly random nature of the attack, the hidden USB drive, it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated execution. The robbery was a smokescreen, a convenient lie to bury the real motive. I pulled up the victim's personal file, cross-referencing it with the OmniCorp data. His name was Arthur Finch, a quiet man, according to his neighbors. No known enemies, no history of trouble. He was just a cog in the corporate machine. But this USB drive suggested he was a cog with a conscience, or perhaps one who had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have. The tension in the room ratcheted up. I was no longer just investigating a murder. I was wading into a nest of vipers, and the clock was ticking. Whatever was on that drive, it was clearly dangerous enough to warrant murder. If it was about to be released, I had to understand its contents before it fell into the wrong hands, or worse, before the people responsible for Finch's death came looking for it. The weight of the evidence, the sheer magnitude of the conspiracy, settled heavily on my shoulders. This was no longer about justice for one man. It was about preventing something far more catastrophic. The hum of the server room was a low thrum against my eardrums, a stark contrast to the usual hushed reverence of a crime scene. This wasn't a crime scene, not in the traditional sense. This was the digital graveyard of OmniCorp, a place where data went to die, or more accurately, to be resurrected. My colleague, a sharp young analyst I'd worked with on a few tech-heavy cases, had granted me access to a quarantined section of their network. Evidence about to be released, racing against time, she'd called it, her voice tight with a professional urgency I understood all too well. The USB drive I'd found at the victim's apartment was a ghost in this digital world. I'd spent hours, hunched over my own machine, running diagnostics, trying to coax its secrets out. It was encrypted, layered with security that made me swear under my breath. But the analyst, bless her digital heart, had a backdoor. Or rather, she knew someone who did. That someone, a shadowy figure in the dark web who dealt in information and access, had provided a key. A digital skeleton key of sorts. Now, here I was, staring at lines of code that scrolled past my eyes like an alien language. My colleague, the analyst, hovered nearby, her fingers flying across her keyboard, a silent partner in this digital excavation. The air was cool, sterile, carrying the faint scent of ozone and recycled air. It was a far cry from the metallic tang of blood or the stale scent of decay I usually navigated. Anything? I asked, my voice a low rumble in the quiet. She shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. Still sifting. The encryption is robust. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They knew how to cover their tracks too, I muttered, thinking of the victim. Clean, too clean. No sign of forced entry, no struggle. Just a man in his study, a perfectly brewed cup of tea gone cold beside him, and the USB drive tucked away like a secret. My gaze drifted to a small framed photograph on a nearby console. It was a group shot, employees of OmniCorp, all smiles and corporate sheen. I scanned their faces, a habit ingrained from years of looking for the telltale flicker of guilt or fear. One face in particular snagged my attention, a man with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual glint of amusement. He was standing a little apart from the others, his arms crossed, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. I didn't recognize him from the victim's apartment, but something about him felt significant. "Who's this guy?" I pointed at the photograph. The analyst glanced over. "Oh, that's the head of research and development, Dr. Elias Thorne. Brilliant mind, they say. A bit of a maverick. Not exactly a team player, but his work is revolutionary." Thorne. The name resonated. OmniCorp's R&D was notoriously secretive. If there was anything worth stealing, it would be coming from Thorne's department. My gut twisted. This wasn't just a simple murder anymore. This was about intellectual property, about power. Anything on the data? I pressed, my focus snapping back to the screens. Almost there, she breathed. Found a hidden partition. Looks like it was recently accessed. And, oh wow, my eyes widened. On her screen, a complex network diagram bloomed, nodes and connections pulsing with data. But it wasn't just a network diagram. It was a roadmap. A roadmap of OmniCorp's proprietary research laid bare. Blueprints, formulas, project timelines, the kind of information that could cripple a competitor or launch a new empire. They were stealing it, I realized, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. The victim, massive, enough to change the entire industry. My mind raced. If this data was about to be released, it meant the perpetrator was still out there, still active. And if they were willing to kill for this information, what else were they capable of? The victim's death was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was this data and the people who wanted to control it. I zoomed in on a particular section of the diagram. Encrypted files, labeled with code names I didn't recognize, but one stood out, Project Nightingale. It was linked to a series of secure servers and the access log showed a recent unauthorized entry. The timestamp coincided with the victim's death. Thorn, I said, my voice a low growl. He's the key. He developed this. He'd know its value and he'd know who'd want it. The analyst pulled up Thorn's personnel file. A sterile corporate profile, devoid of personality. High security clearance, no disciplinary actions, no red flags. But the photograph, the one with the smirk, was still etched in my mind. Mavericks didn't stay mavericks without making waves. I need to talk to Dr. Elias Thorn. I stated, the determination hardening my resolve. This was no longer just about a murder. It was about a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of OmniCorp, and I was determined to expose it, no matter where it led me. The city lights outside seemed to pulse with the same urgent rhythm as my own racing thoughts. The evidence was here in this sterile room, but the truth was still out there, hidden behind a veil of corporate secrets and a killer's carefully constructed lies. I had to get to Thorn before he vanished, or before whatever he was protecting consumed us all. The air in the lab hummed, a low thrumming that usually soothed me, a soundtrack to the meticulous dissection of truth. But today, it felt like a tightening vise. The analyst, a young woman with sharp eyes and even sharper intellect, tapped her stylus against the tablet displaying Thorn's file. Nothing, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, James. No one's ordinary, not really, I grumbled, leaning closer. The photo of Thorn still felt like a challenge. A smirk frozen in time, daring me to find the crack in the polished facade. Mavericks don't get to the top without stepping on toes, or without someone wanting to take them down. She swiped, bringing up Thorn's project history. Complex algorithms, cutting-edge AI development, patents registered under the company's name. All above board, all clean, too clean. It felt like looking at a perfectly manicured lawn, knowing there had to be weeds hidden beneath the surface. What about personal life? I asked, my voice rough. Limited social media presence. No close family listed. A few distant cousins, but no primary contacts. It's like he existed solely for this company. She paused, then a flicker of something crossed her face. Wait, there's a note here buried deep, a personal commendation from a former supervisor, back when he was first hired. My gut clenched, this was it, the tiny thread that might unravel the whole damn thing. Read it. She read aloud, her voice clear and even, but the words themselves sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Thorn displays exceptional initiative and a remarkable ability to problem-solve under pressure. His contributions to Project Nightingale were invaluable. He is a true asset, a rarity in this field. I recall a particular incident, a lab breach. Thorn's quick thinking averted a catastrophe. He acted with courage and decisiveness, saving lives. Lab breach. Catastrophe. Saving lives. The words echoed in the sterile quiet, each syllable a hammer blow against my carefully constructed composure. I felt a phantom heat on my skin, the acrid smell of burning chemicals, the desperate, choked cries. Project Nightingale, I repeated the name tasting like ash. What was that? The analyst's fingers flew across the tablet. Nightingale, ah, here it is. a bioweapon containment system, developed about 15 years ago. Classified, of course, highly sensitive. The project was terminated early due to an accident. Accident. The word was a mockery. I saw it again, the flickering emergency lights, the panic in the eyes of the security detail, the smell of ozone and something metallic, something I'd never forget. I'd been there. Younger, greener, just starting out. A rookie on a scene that had gone sideways faster than anyone could react. What kind of accident? I pushed, my voice strained. The report is heavily redacted, James. It mentions a containment failure, a small release. The cause was determined to be faulty equipment, a critical valve malfunction. There were casualties. Her voice softened, a note of sympathy creeping in. It was a tragic event. I closed my eyes, forcing the images away. The chaos, the fear, the feeling of utter helplessness as I'd watched the scene unfold, knowing I was too far away, too inexperienced, to do anything but document the aftermath. One of the casualties had been close to me, too close, a friend, a mentor. Thorne was involved in Nightingale, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The analyst nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. According to this commendation, he was instrumental in mitigating the damage. He saved lives, James. The report specifically mentions his actions during the breach. My breath hitched. Thorne, the maverick, the man with the smirk, had been a hero at a disaster I'd barely survived. And now he was dead, his death tied to a corporate world I was just beginning to understand. It wasn't just corporate espionage anymore, it was personal. A ghost from my past walking the halls of this present-day murder investigation. What happened to the equipment that failed? I asked, my mind racing. The valve. I can't find any specifics in the declassified summaries. It's all just faulty equipment. Standard procedure for sensitive projects to keep component details out of public record. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed. James, are I all right? I've gone pale. I forced a smile, a brittle, unconvincing thing. Just a lot to process. This Nightingale thing. I needed to see the evidence myself. The real evidence, not the sanitized corporate profiles. I need to see everything we have on Thorne's current projects, I said, my voice gaining a hard edge. And I need to see the preliminary findings on the equipment used in his office. Every wire, every circuit board, every component. If Thorne was involved in something like Nightingale, he wouldn't have trusted standard issue. The analyst nodded, already typing. Understood. I'll pull up the inventory logs and the initial sweep reports. They're part of the evidence about to be released. Racing against time, so we need to be thorough. Racing against time. The phrase felt like a personal taunt. It always was. Thorne's death wasn't just a puzzle, it was a reckoning. And I had a terrifying feeling that I was going to have to confront more than just a killer to solve it. I was going to have to confront myself. The sterile air of the evidence room always felt thick, heavy with the unspoken stories of the items stored within. Today, it was a suffocating blanket. Boxes were stacked high, labeled with cryptic codes that meant everything to the case file and nothing to the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. I ran a hand over my stubbled chin, the grit of familiar, unwelcome sensation. Time was a luxury I didn't have. The prosecutor wanted his preliminary findings yesterday, and Thorne's killer was still out there, breathing the same recycled air I was. My gaze swept over the organized chaos. Each piece of evidence, a silent witness. A torn piece of fabric, a single scuffed shoe, the digital ghost of Thorne's last moments captured on a grainy security feed. It was all cataloged, photographed, bagged, meticulous, but something felt off. A nagging dissonance that I'd learned to trust. It was like a discordant note in a familiar melody, subtle but jarring. I pulled out the file on Thorne's laptop. The digital forensics team had done their best, but Thorne was smart. Too smart, perhaps. His encrypted files were a fortress, and their efforts, though thorough, had yielded little beyond the expected corporate communications. Business as usual, except for the fact that the CEO of Thorne Industries was now dead. Then I saw it. A small, unassuming USB drive tucked away in a separate plastic bag labeled with a handwritten note. found in Thorne's personal effects separate from laptop. My brow furrowed. Why separate? Thorne was notoriously organized. This felt intentional. A breadcrumb, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the bag. The drive was a common model, nothing flashy. I plugged it into a secure terminal, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The drive spun to life and a single folder appeared, labeled simply, Project Nightingale. Inside, a series of documents, financial records, coded correspondence, and something that made my breath catch. It was a detailed proposal, outlining a plan for Thorne Industries to acquire a rival company, not through conventional means but through less savory methods, industrial espionage, sabotage. The proposal was signed not by Thorne but by a name I recognized with a chill, Dr. Alistair Reed. Reed, Thorne's lead research scientist, a man known for his brilliance and his almost pathological secrecy. I dismissed him earlier, focusing on Thorne's business rivals, the usual suspects. But this changed everything. Reed wasn't just Thorne's subordinate, he was a key player, and his ambition, it seemed, was as ruthless as Thorne's own. I needed to see him, now. The drive back to Thorne Industries' research facility was a blur of adrenaline and simmering unease. The facility, a gleaming monolith of glass and steel, now felt less like a hub of innovation and more like a gilded cage. The security guards, usually polite, eyed me with a new wariness. My badge, usually a symbol of authority, felt like a flimsy excuse. I found Reed in his private laboratory, a space that mirrored his reputation, sterile, minimalist, and humming with an unnerving quiet. He was hunched over a complex piece of equipment, his silver hair catching the overhead light. He didn't look up as I entered. "Dr. Reed," I said, my voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "We need to talk." He finally turned, his eyes sharp and intelligent, assessing me. There was a flicker of something in them, surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. "Detective James, to what do I owe this unscheduled visit?" I walked towards him, placing the bag containing the USB drive on his pristine workbench. "This, Project Nightingale." His gaze dropped to the bag, and for the first time I saw a crack in his composure. A subtle tightening around his jaw, a fractional widening of his pupils. He remained silent, his expression unreadable. It seems Thorne Industries was dabbling in more than just advanced composites. I continued, leaning forward. And I, Dr. Reed, were at the heart of it. He finally spoke, his voice smooth, measured. "Thorne Industries is a business, detective. Businesses innovate, they grow. Sometimes that requires strategic maneuvering. Strategic maneuvering that involves blackmail and sabotage." I challenged, my voice hardening. "The proposal, doctor, my signature is on it, and it's dated just weeks before Thorne's death." He picked up the bag, his movements deliberate, and turned the USB drive over in his fingers. Thorne was an ambitious man. He envisioned great things for this company. Sometimes his vision outpaced conventional methods. "And I helped him," I pressed. "Did I kill him, Dr. Reed? Did he threaten to expose my little project?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Detective, I misunderstand. Thorne wasn't the architect of Nightingale. He was merely the facilitator, the one with the resources." My stomach clenched. "What are I saying?" "I'm saying, Detective," Reed said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "that Thorne Industries was merely a front. A very profitable one, I'll admit, but a front nonetheless. Project Nightingale was never about Thorne's personal ambition. It was far larger. Thorne's death. It was an inconvenience, a disruption, but the project, detective, the project continues. And I, by digging into Thorne's affairs, have just made myself a rather significant inconvenience." The evidence about to be released, racing against time. The words echoed in my head, no longer a simple deadline, but a warning. Reed wasn't just a scientist, he was a puppet master, and Thorne was just one of his pawns. And now it seemed I was next in line. The stakes had just skyrocketed, and the game had become infinitely more dangerous. My own past, the one I'd tried so desperately to outrun, felt like a lead weight in my gut. This wasn't just about Thorn anymore. The sterile scent of the evidence processing lab always did little to calm my nerves, but today it felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the sealed bags and meticulously organized trays. My gaze flicked to the digital clock on the wall, 23:47. Less than an hour. The stakes had just skyrocketed. I paced the small space, the scuff of my worn leather shoes a rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic beating in my chest. The chief had been clear. The preliminary findings on Thorn's device had to be ready for the board meeting. Thorn, the brilliant engineer, dead in his lab, a supposed suicide. But the subtle inconsistencies, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone that lingered around the scene, they screamed foul play. Still at it, James. I spun around. Reed stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dimmer light of the hallway. He looked uneasy, not his usual detached, clinical self. His hands were clasped behind his back, a nervous tick I'd never noticed before. "What do I want, Reed?" I kept my voice level, but the edge was there. He was the only one who had the access and the knowledge to possibly help me untangle this mess without raising too many red flags, and he knew it. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "Just checking. The chief is getting antsy. He wants a preliminary report on Thorn's project." "I'm working on it," I said, gesturing to the workbench littered with Thorn schematics and a disassembled prototype of what looked like a sophisticated data storage unit. But it's not as simple as suicide. Thorn was onto something big, something someone wanted silenced. Reed's eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, seemed to dart around the room, avoiding mine. "We all have our projects, James." Thorn was ambitious. Ambitious enough to fake his own death. I walked over to the prototype, picking up a small, intricate circuit board. "This isn't just a data storage unit, is it? There are security protocols here that are off the charts. Military grade, easily, and the encryption. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." He finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of something akin to fear. Thorn was working with a consortium, discreetly. A consortium. My brow furrowed. "What kind of consortium?" Reed hesitated, chewing on his lower lip. "The kind that deals in sensitive information, high-value data. Think offshore accounts, proprietary research, political leverage." Thorn was developing a secure, untraceable transfer system. My mind raced. Thorn, a seemingly quiet engineer involved in this, it didn't fit. But then Thorn had always been an enigma. And who were these people? Who hired him? "That's the problem," Reed said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're ghosts. They operate through shell corporations, layers of anonymity. Thorn only dealt with a single point of contact, a facilitator. He never knew the names, just the directives. But I must have some idea," I pressed, my voice gaining urgency. "There has to be a trace, a financial trail, a communication log." He walked over to a secured terminal, tapping in a series of commands. The screen flickered to life, displaying complex financial matrices. "I've been discreetly looking." Thorn was paid handsomely. Payments routed through several holding companies in the Caymans, then dispersed through a series of anonymous cryptocurrency transactions. The only consistent link is a single encrypted email address and a meeting schedule. He brought up a calendar interface. Dates were marked with cryptic alphanumeric codes. "These are rendezvous points, not for Thorn, but for the facilitator." Thorn would receive encrypted instructions for each transfer, and then meet the facilitator at a designated secure location to hand over the data and receive payment. "And the board meeting," I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. "The evidence about to be released, racing against time. That's what Thorn was working on, wasn't it? The information that was going to be revealed at the board meeting. This consortium, they were trying to prevent it, and Thorn, he was either going to sell it to the highest bidder or he was going to expose them himself." Reed nodded, his face grim. "The timing is too coincidental, James. Thorn's death, the impending board meeting. This consortium, they're not playing games. They're ruthless." He pointed to one of the cryptic codes on the calendar. "This one, it's for tomorrow. An exchange is scheduled for dawn, at the old abandoned factory down by the docks." My gaze snapped to his. The abandoned factory, a place I knew all too well from a case years ago, a case that had nearly broken me. It was a perfect place for a clandestine meeting. And if Thorne's data was about to be released and someone wanted it suppressed, the docks were a likely place for the transaction to go down. "Who is the facilitator?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Reed's eyes widened slightly. He hesitated for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. I think I know who it is. A man named Silas. He's known for his discretion and his efficiency. Silas was a ghost, a phantom in the underworld, rumored to be involved in everything from arms dealing to corporate sabotage. If he was the facilitator, then Thorne's death wasn't just about silencing him. It was about controlling the information. And if I was next in line, it meant I was getting too close to the truth. The evidence about to be released was more explosive than I'd ever imagined. And the clock was ticking not just for Thorne's findings, but for my own life. The flickering fluorescent lights of the precinct's secure archive hummed a monotonous tune, a soundtrack to my growing unease. Boxes, stacked high and labeled with cryptic alphanumeric codes, lined the walls, each one a potential Pandora's box. I ran a hand over my stubbled chin, the grit of familiar comfort or perhaps a sign of my own disarray. Silas. The name still echoed in my mind, a discordant note in the symphony of this case. Thorne's death was a ripple, but Silas was the undertow, pulling everything into a deeper, darker current. My colleague, a sharp woman with eyes that missed nothing, stood by the sturdy metal table, sifting through a thick folder. "Anything?" she asked, her voice low, cutting through the hum. I shook my head, frustration tightening my chest. Nothing concrete, just whispers and shadows. Thorne was a leak, but who was he leaking to? And why the elaborate charade of his death? She pushed a printout across the table. "This is what we recovered from Thorne's encrypted drive. The consortium, their offshore accounts, shell corporations, the whole rotten structure. It's all here." I picked it up, the paper cool against my fingertips. This was it. The proof, the evidence about to be released, racing against time that Thorne had been so desperate to get out. But the sheer volume of it, the intricate layers of deception, it was overwhelming. "They're going to move fast," I murmured, my gaze sweeping over the complex diagrams of financial flows. "Once they realize Thorne's data is compromised, they'll either bury it deeper or eliminate anyone who has it." My eyes met hers, and the unspoken understanding passed between us. That meant us. "So what's the plan, James?" he asked, his tone steady, but I could see the tension in the set of his jaw. The plan. It had been forming in the back of my mind, a desperate gamble born from sleepless nights and a gnawing sense of responsibility. Thorne hadn't died for nothing. He died trying to expose them, and I wouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. "We don't just hand this over to the higher-ups," I said, tapping the printout. "They'll get bogged down in bureaucracy, and by the time they act, it'll be too late. The consortium will have already covered their tracks, and Silas will have vanished into thin air." She raised an eyebrow. "And my alternative? We make it public, not all of it, not yet, just enough to create a firestorm. We leak select pieces to a few trusted journalists, ones who aren't afraid to stir the pot. We hit them where it hurts, their reputation. Force their hand." Slow smile spread across her face. "Bold and dangerous." "They're already dangerous," I countered. "This is about leveling the playing field, giving them a taste of their own medicine." I pointed to a name on one of the charts, a holding company that led back to a familiar, if distant, name from my own troubled past. "And I think I know who's pulling the strings from this side of the operation." Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Someone I thought I'd left behind," I admitted, a bitter taste in my mouth. "Someone who knows how I think, how I operate. This is personal now." The next few hours were a blur of hushed phone calls, encrypted messages, and the tense thrill of orchestrating chaos. We carefully selected the most damning pieces of evidence, the names of politicians on their payroll, the accounts where illicit funds were laundered, the proof of their involvement in destabilizing markets. We packaged them, not as official evidence, but as the desperate act of a whistleblower. As dawn approached, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, I stood by the window of the archive, watching the city slowly awaken. The weight of what we were about to do settled on me. We were about to ignite a fire, and I had no idea if we could control the blaze. She held up a small, unmarked USB drive. Sent to 3 different outlets. They'll verify, and then. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for them to spring it. And when they did, I would be ready. I had to be for Thorne and for myself. The phone in my pocket buzzed, a jarring sound in the quiet room. A single cryptic message. They knew, Silas knew, and he wasn't the type to play by any rules. This wasn't just about corporate espionage anymore. This was a hunt, and I was the prey. "We need to move," I said, my voice rough. "Now." He was already grabbing her jacket. "Where are we going?" "To the place where it all started," I replied, a grim determination settling over me. "To the warehouse." Thorne mentioned it, a meeting point, a place where the real deals were made. The air in the archive felt thick, suffocating. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I could feel their eyes on me, even through the concrete walls. The consortium, Silas, the ghosts of my past. They were closing in. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I was walking towards them. The air in the archive felt thick, suffocating. I stood, my hand hovering over the stack of manila folders, the weight of what was inside pressing down on me. This was it. The culmination of weeks of digging, of sleepless nights staring at lab reports and encrypted messages. The truth laid bare. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled the top folder towards me. The label, stark and official. Read, Project Nightingale Phase Roman 3 data. This was the core of it all, the proprietary algorithm that Silas's company had stolen, the one that had cost lives. Inside, I found what I expected: schematics, financial projections, and the chillingly detached memos detailing the ethical compromises made in its development. But it was the final few pages that truly made my stomach clench. A list of names, not just the scientists who'd worked on Nightingale, but those who had been disposed of when they became inconvenient, including the journalist Sarah, whose name had been a whisper in the wind until now. Beside me, the younger detective shifted his weight. He'd been a shadow for days, his youthful eagerness a stark contrast to my own weariness. "You think this is enough, James?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I met his gaze, the dim light glinting off my tired eyes. "It has to be. This isn't just about Silas anymore. This is about the entire network he built, the people who benefited from his ruthlessness." I tapped the folder. "This proves intent, it proves premeditation, and it proves the extent of their depravity." We were in the bowels of the precinct, a sterile, windowless room that served as a makeshift evidence hub. The usual fluorescent glare was muted, replaced by the stark glow of portable work lamps. The air smelled of stale coffee and something metallic, the scent of hurried operations. Around us, colleagues moved with a quiet urgency, packing and cataloging the final pieces of evidence. The evidence about to be released, racing against time. Silas and his associates were scheduled to leave the country on a private jet in less than 24 hours. We had to move, and we had to move fast. My phone buzzed, a jarring interruption to the tense quiet. It was a text from the colleague who'd been working the financial trails. "Silas is liquidating assets, moving everything. He knows we're close." A knot tightened in my chest. "They're spooked," I muttered, showing the message to the younger detective. "They're trying to cover their tracks, disappear." He nodded, his jaw set. "We can't let them." I looked back at the Nightingale files, then at the case notes spread across the table. The pieces were all there, but fitting them together had been the brutal part. The initial murder, the supposed robbery gone wrong, had been a smokescreen. Sarah hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She'd been targeted. Her investigation into Silas's company had gotten too close. And the other deaths, the ones that had been written off as accidents or suicides, just a description, a ghost. The younger detective pointed to a photograph on the table. It was a grainy security camera still, taken from a distance. He was wearing a distinctive watch, though, silver with a deep blue face, custom engraving on the back, almost illegible in the photo, but it's there. I leaned closer, squinting at the enlarged image. The engraving was indeed faint, a swirl of lines that could be anything. Anything. We're running it through databases, cross-referencing with known associates of Silas's security detail. It's a long shot. He paused, then added, but Silas has a habit of employing ex-military. Men with specialized skills, men who can be discreet. My mind flashed back to a case years ago, a messy affair involving a disgruntled former operative. The details were hazy, like trying to recall a dream, but the feeling of unease, of something deeply wrong, lingered. Was it possible? Could this be the same individual? If there's even a sliver of a match, I want to know about it. The younger detective was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I returned my attention to the Nightingale files, rereading the names of the deceased. Each one was a life extinguished, a potential threat neutralized. Suddenly, a thought struck me. The encrypted communications. Silas had been using a private, untraceable network, but we'd managed to intercept fragments enough to confirm his involvement. What if the hitman's identity was embedded within those fragments? A digital fingerprint, perhaps, or a code name. The comms logs, I said, turning to the younger detective. The intercepted messages. Did we analyze them for any direct communication with an unidentified party around the time of Sarah's death? He looked up, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. We focused on Silas's direct communications with his inner circle. We assumed any external contact would be through intermediaries. We assumed wrong, I stated, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was the gap, the blind spot. Pull those logs again. I want a full sweep. Every anomaly, every encrypted burst, every communication that doesn't fit the usual pattern. Prioritize anything around the date of Sarah's murder. He nodded, already issuing commands into his phone. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. We were a team, working against the clock, piecing together the final fragments of this grim puzzle. The consortium's reach was vast, their influence insidious, but they had made a mistake. They had underestimated Sarah, and they had underestimated me. I looked at the stack of evidence, the weight of it no longer just a burden but a weapon. The truth was here, waiting to be unleashed. And this time, no amount of money or power would be able to bury it. This wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about reclaiming justice, about ensuring that the ghosts of the past and the victims of the present would finally find their peace. The hum of the lights seemed to fade, replaced by the thrum of anticipation. The chase was almost over.